Good morning, sir.
Good morning, Mark.
How are you?
I'm good.
I'm glad to hear it.
Our traditional sign-on, good morning.
Good morning. Yeah.
For those that are not on a morning time, it's still pleasant to hear good morning, isn't it? It's just like a nice, cheery, happy...
Yeah.
I think we should always say good morning.
It's a good way to greet someone.
It is.
In the midst of a conversation, to the point of saying, how are you?
Yeah. Yeah. But it's a little more cheery and a little less expectant.
And it's even raining this morning.
It is raining, but you know what? Still a good morning.
Yeah, it is.
I have the window open. Hopefully they can't hear them. Well,
a few birds won't hurt. A few birds won't hurt.
Birds sneak into a lot of episodes. They
That's
have a
right.
lot to say.
It's all about...
if you could decode what they're saying, it's likely it's more intelligent than what I'm saying. I won't speak for Mark.
It's all about location. Yeah, like real estate. Location. And we just happen to be located near some birds. Yeah.
Right.
And birds happen to be located near us. So, yeah.
That's good.
It is good. Welcome to How I See It with me, Mark Pratt, and
Justin Sternberg. This is a podcast that works to counter cultural polarization through thoughtful conversations. We like birds, we like rain,
yeah,
and we like the morning.
Thus we are here. Not too many people want to be here with us at 6:15 in the morning, but
although we haven't had anyone turn us down.
We have adjusted times.
Yes.
For people.
Don't tell people that.
Well, that's true. This is when we do. This is when a podcast needs to be recorded.
That's right.
No.
Thus let it be written. Thus let it be done. How's that go?
This is just what works good for us.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so it shall be.
So good morning.
Yes, and you as well.
It's a good morning to talk about some political subjects.
Ooh, I'm all for political subjects.
Mm-hmm.
What'd you have in mind?
Well, one of the topics we pre-discussed the discussion of discussing it is gun control.
Ah, yes.
I thought that would be a great one to talk about because I think I've shot a gun twice in my life, 2 different occurrences. One in the last 2 months. So,
wow. If I may ask, and I realize for me, because I realize shooting can be, guns can be a personal thing. It's not that everybody wants to admit or share, along that line, and I respect that privacy. But what did you shoot, if I may ask?
It was handgun.
Okay.
I don't remember what it was.
And you just were basically shooting targets?
And a can.
Blinking?
Yeah. Can.
Wonderful.
Yeah. I hit it. So.
Nice job. Now,
don't ask how close I was.
Well, I want to know how it felt to hit the can.
It was cool.
Yeah.
But it's, I wouldn't score it as high as like a nice throw in frisbee to someone in the end zone.
Sure.
That's much better.
Sure. But I'm curious because from my perspective, I have been that person who has introduced a number of people to shooting sports,
cool.
I'll call it. And I think I've watched or perceived what was initially a fear of guns to I've watched that transition from a fear of guns to an enjoyment of shooting. The ability to say, oh, well, this is kind of fun. And there's a sense of accomplishment, and that's where I think that's where so much of my perspective comes from.
Yeah, so should we dive right in?
Of course, why not?
Why is that fun worth all the pain and agony and sadness and destruction and death and right? That comes with at least what we read, right? What we hear, what we see, that comes with guns, right? School shootings and, mass shootings and, murder suicides, and I mean, you know,
Yeah.
we can go on and on and on and on and on. So,
And I appreciate that question.
I'm going right to the polarizing thing of saying, because I don't really, I think part of my thing here is like, I'm very unindoctrinated as to the enjoyment of guns and the whole culture.
Sure.
But I'm also not anti-guns.
Yeah.
I'm pretty neutral. But this is a very, 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 very polarizing topic for many reasons. So that I hit you with the hardest question right away.
Well, that's okay.
But,
I'm good with that.
It's a good morning.
I mean, yeah, it is still a good morning. And I'm thinking, I like your use of the word indoctrination. Because I'm honestly reflecting on that. Am I a person who has been indoctrinated, or has my experience been very much positive, and I've grown up with mentors, if you will, who hunted, who shot for, who hunted and did, you know, shooting sports in such a way that made it appealing for me. And I think, you know, and I'm not skipping the part, you know, that goes further on, but I'm able to recognize too, I mean, and I'll just tell you the long story short, my Sunday school teacher growing up, you know, was a Marine who was a riflesmith for 60 years, still is.
That's cool.
You know, so for me, and, you know, and we've had that discussion, you know, around gun control. It's like he's been working with guns for 60 years and no gun he's never been injured. You know, he hasn't died. He hasn't been mortally wounded. He hasn't been shot, you know, by a gun in his shop. You follow me? And I guess that's where my background comes from. And granted, I grew up hunting with my grandfather, my father, you know, those kind of things. So that's where I'm coming from. If you want to call that an indoctrination, you're welcome to.
I wasn't attacking you, Mark.
No, but I like the use of that word. But I think in some cases that is a part of the polarizing dynamic when we're not able to recognize where someone comes from.
Right.
And I want to recognize, yes, I grew up in rural America. You know, I didn't grow up in inner city where, you know, their view, and here again, I'm not trying to be judgmental, but a person in my era who grew up inner city is going to have a far different view of guns than I do.
Yeah.
And that they're likely, depending, to have a view that is a little more fear-based, or even seeing the hurt that people inflict with guns.
Yeah.
You follow me? And I think that's a very, from my perspective, that becomes very clear that, you know, when I hear gun control, you know, that's what I have to recognize. Someone, when I hear that phrase, I recognize someone has been hurt. Someone has been murdered. Somebody has been, you know, maimed to some degree. And my heart goes out for those individuals. My heart goes out for law enforcement, you know, in that process, who, you know, people who are working hard to protect people. And I think for me, that also comes back to a Second Amendment right that I have to protect myself. You know, the right to keep and bear arms is fundamental to me from a American standpoint. Mm-hmm. And that's where I, you know, that's my view, and that's how I see things. And I, you know, I recognize, we can talk death rates and percentages, for that kind of thing. But for me, it is more about that right that I have, and I will bring it back to guns being very similar to any other amoral thing. I mean, let's be honest, we just spoke about money. We've, I don't think we've talked about sex directly as a topic.
Right.
But, what was meant, I guess that's where I come. All of those things have a tremendous ability to hurt people in the wrong hands. Money has that ability. Sex has that ability. You follow me? To be able to, and granted, money, we could probably argue, has its higher rate. Sex trafficking, if we want to go to these extremes, we can look at, people hurt. I think about it when you think about it like that, there's just not off the top of my head, but thinking about it a little bit, there's about 15 in North Carolina. There's about around 1,600 fatalities per 100,000 people with guns. Okay, homicides goes to like 8.6. So, and that makes me sad, because I recognize some of those fatalities are, when I even hear of it, people who were hunting together and someone did something unsafe, and now they have to share that. It would be like a teenage driver who, is behind, and they accidentally kill someone. And, and I just feel for those people, because they have to carry that the rest of their life. And, I mean, even I can just remember, kids that I grew up with in high school, accidental deaths. And so, I think of that, and it was interesting just thinking about it, that the divorce rate is like 2.8 per 1,000 versus homicide rate 8.6 per 100,000. You follow me? And I think about that hurt that goes along with divorce. Now, granted, nobody's being murdered in a divorce, but I still think of it as a
in most divorces.
Yes. I suppose some do end up in there's a crossover there.
Right. There's a Venn diagram where there's some crossover between guns and divorce and death.
Homicide and divorce. Yes, there's a part where and I feel that's, and I recognize that's not my experience. And so I don't minimize it, but for me, it comes back to there being a sin issue. And so, yes, I'm not for, there's another statistic, 30 people, there's drug overdose is a higher rate per 100,000. It's 30 people per 100,000 that will die from a drug overdose. You follow me? And I reckon, and here again, I'm putting these out here because I want to create a comparison. Car rates would be like 1,500. So, I mean, they're pretty, not necessarily similar. Gun rates are going to be higher. Well, as a total, not homicides, and that's where I'm at. And I don't want to make that seem like I'm blaming anyone, because I do believe, and there's a number of laws already on the books. There's different organizations that we can turn to, state law ordinances. Every state is different in its gun control law. North Carolina has like 61 pages of what you can do and what you can't do in a state ordinance document. And every state has their own. So I think about it's not necessarily that laws aren't there. And yet...
Is there any law about shooting people?
Yes.
Because I feel like a lot of people disobey that one.
Exactly. And unfortunately, we can, for me, we can't, even biblically, there was a reason that Jesus came and the laws, because the laws were insufficient. Troy shared it a couple of times. We can't legislate morality, and I think for me, unfortunately, that's where a lot of this comes from, because I recognize that we don't have, from my perspective, it's a sin problem, not a gun problem.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of how I look at it. And there's...
All right, it's my turn, Mark.
Yeah, go for it. Question or an answer?
No, I got a lot of thoughts.
Okay, go for it.
Wrote them down. So.
Oh, wow.
I was giving you lots of lines.
Yeah.
Like the fishing lines. So
that's fair enough.
But my line's running out.
You're ready to hook me, aren't you?
All right, you guys ready? We're going to hook Mark.
Yeah, go for it.
No, the first thing that stood out to me in your conversation was the cultural difference. So
yeah,
that's what you were describing, is that your culture embraced guns and the enjoyment of them and what it represented in terms of camaraderie.
Sure.
Right? And so, obviously that isn't given in a pros cons list very often, but people totally, I think, underestimate the value of that in the cultures that embrace guns and shooting and hunting and that whole culture. And I love hearing about my friends' exploits when they go hunting and all these things and shooting together and just the enjoyment they have shooting together. So it's awesome. It's one of those things that I see as culturally being a really cool thing in a certain culture that I have not quite, again, been indoctrinated to that culture.
Sure.
That term, you said, is it indoctrination or is it, I forget the other phrase, but I think it's probably both, right? It's a little bit of both, a little bit of,
but it's interesting. I want to come back, if I'm not going too far on my line lead.
You're good. I gave you a little more.
It's interesting when I think of my culture, and you mentioned, you in your question, you asked about school shootings. And I'm not meaning to be lewd or make light of school shootings, but there was school shootings long before Sandy Hook. Okay, if I may say so in a loose terminology, partook of school shooting. And what I'm going to say is I'm going to clarify that, and I'm not making light of it, but when I grew up, part of this era, we actually took our guns to school. We were able to take our guns on the bus, and I was part of a club, a sportsman's club, and we would leave the school at lunchtime to go shoot as a group at school. So my kids, it's like, no, you're lying. Not, I mean, they believe me, but, to hear someone say, we were able to take our guns to school and shoot at the school, basically, or, just off the grounds, that just seems so foreign. But I think, it's just a difference. And here again, looking at the spectrum, I realize there are actual real school shootings where people die. Sandy Hook, I think, was a bigger one because that was where, young kids were affected. And I think that's where a lot of our SRO type stuff that we, have today, officers in school, I think that was a turning point, when it came to schools and school shootings, to have a person go into an elementary school. And here again, I'm not minimizing the harm that guns can have, but I also think from my personal opinion, I also think we have a mental health issue.
Yeah, so that's part of the conversation, which is,
I'm not meaning to divide off here.
So good. I think, let me write this down.
Have we switched roles? I'm just wondering. Normally, I feel like I'm the interviewing person, and now I feel like we switched roles.
This is good. This
I'm
is
okay with
definitely again a subject that you're passionate about due to cultural.
Yes.
Where I am very much on the neutral point. Although I will say I'm not. I would say I'm even when it comes to the school shootings. I get just like I can feel the heat on the back of my neck just thinking about it because I naturally insert my children's face into that picture and go, I don't care what your argument is, Mark.
Yep.
I don't want my child dead.
Yep.
Right. And
Agreed.
so, and I think,
and that's why I wanted to clarify.
Yeah.
I'm not making light of school shootings.
Right.
At
I'm
all
not implying you
inference.
are. I guess I'm just saying that is the one area where I'm less neutral. It's like,
sure,
let's figure this out.
Sure.
In a sense, because to me, every time another school shooting, there's mass shootings in. Yeah, we can talk about. There's so much to talk about, but when it comes to school shootings, I'm like, okay, come on, guys, we got to figure this out. You know what I mean? And but at the same time. Another political tough subject, right, is abortion. And arguably, more children are, dead as a result of that law.
Sure. Than
the lack of shooting, gun laws or whatever.
No, along that line, I believe in that our appreciation or valuing of life has diminished as well across the board.
Yeah, I agree. Even to the degree where suicide is astronomical right now, rates, because the same reason.
Sure.
My life's not worth it, your life's not worth it. What's the point? That kind of thing.
And I think that's where, in a polarizing topic, if I am, I'll say pro-gun, in that whole pro-anti, I'm going to say healthy gun perspective, I think people who have a healthy gun perspective can be lumped into that aspect where you don't care about people, being killed and harmed and hurt. No, that's not true. Because I think you can have that care for people, that valuing of life, to be able to recognize, okay, yes, this is a format, but something else is going on here.
Yeah.
And there's been a tremendous devaluing of the importance of life.
I think that's the key, though, right? Is that there is kind of this intersection of problems in culture right now. So basically, we're at, in a lot of cases, our worst mental health state in a lot of cases.
Sure.
And also have access to guns in a way that's maybe too loose, right? Maybe this is the discussion.
Sure.
That intersection is a problem, and that's what needs to be addressed. When the talking points are brought up, well, people are the problem in mental health.
Yeah.
It's like, yes, but I can't go into that person's house and work on their mental health.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
I can't.
Right.
I also think about, you said, you grew up going to a shooting club at school, which I think, part of the problem is that we don't have those anymore.
No, I hear you.
So maybe that would help. But besides that point, we also now have seatbelts.
Sure.
Where maybe at that same time when you were going to a shooting club or with your friend, you also didn't have seatbelts in your vehicle.
I grew up without seatbelts.
Right? Does that make sense? So that
makes perfect sense.
So as we progress and we realize what harms people in ways that we can save lives, things adjust, right?
Yep.
And I think there's almost nobody would argue seatbelts are a bad thing. Right?
Nobody would argue that they are bad.
I said almost nobody would, argue that they're a bad thing. Now, some people don't like them; they restrict their freedom, so they won't wear them or whatever. That whole thing. But almost nobody would argue that they're a bad thing, and the stats show that they've helped. I think that's where the common sense thing comes in. You've heard that term, common sense gun laws, right? I don't necessarily know what all the parameters of that, but the way I hear that is, let's just make it a little bit harder to get a gun. Let's make sure that if you have some mental stability issues, it's really hard for you to get a gun to the degree where you might have to go illegal to do it, which can happen. I'm not, of course, we're not ruling that out. And
Right.
We know the laws aren't perfect.
Yep.
We know bad people will do bad things, right? But if it's just a little bit harder for me to make a rash mental health decision, you know, I guarantee you 99.9% of a shooter's life, they would never make that decision to do that. Well, I shouldn't say I guarantee it. Okay. I feel strongly that a lot of these events are a result of an extreme mental health event in their life.
Sure.
If that makes sense.
Basically, the crossing of two lines.
Right. And
a gun in the wrong hands.
Yep. Where if that gun wasn't in the wrong hands because they didn't have it, maybe they, do something healthy. I don't know, drive off into the sunset and just wait a while or whatever. I don't know. I don't know what the alternatives are. But I do know the mass shootings continue to expand. The other part about this, which I'm fully aware of, which we talked about in the politics episode, is publicity. So
sure,
we know that this is a hot button topic, and so we know every news outlet is going to latch onto it because it's a moneymaker.
Sure.
So that, I think that has to be said. That has to be accounted for. There were probably school shootings in the 1950s. How many, I don't know. Did they track it the same way? I don't know. But what I know now is there is another intersection of events, which is we really like to talk about shootings. And as a result, the correlation is not causation. We don't know that.
Gotcha.
There's also more shootings.
Sure.
Are we also to blame for talking so much about it and glorifying, in a sense, these shooters? And not only glorifying, but also putting seeds of thought. And it's like, that's an option, and yeah, that being said,
because it can almost become, well, that person got so many people.
Wait, what?
Is that what you're saying to it?
Not necessarily, because again, I don't think that most shooters are sitting around thinking about how can I hurt the most people at my next opportunity. My thought is more an extreme mental health event happened and they had no outlet. And that was the outlet they chose. They're like, I need this pain to get out of me. Right?
I
don't know. Or this anger, this hate, right?
Sure.
That's boiled up.
We have anger issues.
Yeah. That's kind of more what I'm saying than they're listening going, ooh, that's one way I could kill a lot of people. I don't think it's not like those villains in cartoons,
Yeah. But I think there is, and I think we can identify to a certain degree, a shared pattern that individuals who do mass shootings, whether it's outside of schools or inside of schools, tend to have an isolated perspective on the world. And I'm agreeing with yours. It's like that same person who, if they were able to have positive influences, or like myself, I'm not saying but that camaraderie, might never have even thought about going to that route, if you will.
Yeah.
That wouldn't have necessarily been an option.
Yeah. There's a lot of shows, movies, TV shows, documentaries discussing some of those outlier type people, right? Like,
sure.
Serial killers, stuff
sure.
like that. And one thing that seems to be common in my understanding of those shows and in my consumption of them is that they haven't really cracked that nut yet. Does that make sense? It's not like there's this common thing that they can point to. They're almost always like, the drama is, well, he seemed to be nice. He seemed to right? It never quite lines up. Sometimes they're like, oh yeah, that guy was a creeper before or whatever. But we know lots of creepers who aren't killing people.
Sure.
At least I assume.
Yeah.
The point is, we haven't really cracked the nut as to what triggers people to become this way or to persist in this way. So that's the hard part about, I don't know. I lost my thought.
That's the hard part about being able to protect each and every person all the time.
Yeah.
And because in some ways, I forget, and this was my part of your media dynamic came to mind. Probably about a year and a half ago, maybe 2 years now, COVID type time frame. I remember there happened to be a day where I want to say Texas had a shooting and maybe Ohio had a shooting at the same time, just different, from that media standpoint. And I remember seeing the People headline kind of walking through the magazine, checkout aisle type stuff. And the question was, when is it going to stop? And I remember just kind of thinking about that and being able to say, I'm not sure it can. So to be able to think that it could, in some ways, from my perspective, is naive. If we're not going to factor a sin component into this, because if man, in who we are, can stop this, then we're something different than we really are, from my perspective. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. I don't think we have the ability. Now, does that mean I'm not for safer, or background checks? No, I'm okay with background checks. I'm all good with background checks. I believe all firearms should be purchased legally and registered as necessary according to the laws of that state. So it's not. I'm definitely not a person who's saying, well, it doesn't matter how people get guns, or and granted, from my perspective, I think as long as a person's following the guidelines outlined by the state, then that's what you can do. And the mental health, bringing it back to that, yes, I am a proponent of, a person who has, I can't go so far as to say a person who has certain mental health issues should not be able to protect themselves. Okay. I believe it needs to be specific. And I think it's difficult for law enforcement to be able to handle each one of these circumstances on a case-by-case basis.
Yeah.
It's impossible, I would dare say. And yet, I'm with you in that context. I would rather err on the side of a person who has serious mental health issues not being able to have access. And I'm just thinking about it in my context. I have, worked with people who have been, on the verge of suicidal, and worked with people to be able to say, okay, we need to move your guns someplace else. If you have them, this isn't the time for you to be able to have guns in your home. And, and I've had those discussions with people, routinely. And, and granted, I've never, had the other part where a person is saying, I'm going to, hurt someone. I've never experienced that in my office, but I've experienced the other side where, people are at risk, shall I say, for, suicide. And it's like, yeah, we've had these discussions before, and so that's as a mental health professional, that's how I see it.
Yeah, it's an important and good perspective to bring to the table, right? Like in terms of the mental health aspect. The other thing you mentioned, I was just thinking about when culturally, like shooting together, that was a big thing. But also, talking about the gun club when you were growing up, basically how the laws have changed a little bit in various areas. I was thinking about, I think it's like India or a country close to India.
Okay.
Or maybe it's several countries where they'll pack a whole family on a motorcycle, right? Have you seen these pictures?
Sure.
It's amazing what they do with motorcycles, right?
Yeah.
And
they basically make a clown car out of a motorcycle.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Yeah.
It is incredible. Like, I am in awe of what they can accomplish with motorcycles.
I hear you.
We wouldn't necessarily advocate for that or say, because culturally it's acceptable there, we should loosen our laws to then allow for those cultural, norms, right?
Sure.
Because I don't know the numbers. I haven't looked it up. I'm guessing they have more fatalities on motorcycles than the average. That would be my guess.
Yeah.
Maybe they're like
Maybe
super
not.
amazingly
But still,
good at it, right?
I'm hearing where you're coming from.
Yeah. But we wouldn't necessarily look at that and go, well, culturally it's acceptable and a part of the norm and whatever, so we should allow for it. So I think that was just my like thought in terms of, well, culture is an important part.
It is.
What I would say is the culture, the most important thing about the culture perspective is in these conversations, in the how I see it, in these polarizing discussions, to recognize like that family of 5 on a motorcycle, they're not idiots for doing that.
No.
Where if you saw that in America, you would judge them harshly, right? Right? Does that make sense? So I think a little room for perspective on the, no guns or extreme gun control side to say, culturally, there's something happening here that maybe we don't quite understand.
Sure.
And we should not write it off as not a thing because I don't understand it, which is, again, very much what this podcast is about, right? Like, take time to understand and get to know other perspectives that mean nothing to you.
Sure.
Because just because they mean nothing to you doesn't mean they mean nothing across the board.
Yep.
It's very often, that it's the other way around. And then vice versa, like you mentioned, inner city, guns represent one thing, violence and crime and the wrong people having them, right? And so if that's the culture you grow up in, you live on, a certain city block that you kind of live in fear because of guns, right? You've heard them while you're trying to go to bed, shootings, and you've seen drive-bys occur and that kind of thing. And this is all guns, right, to you. There's that perspective and that culture even that should be identified, and embraced on your side of things, which I think that you try to do. But I'm saying if you're on this is my culture, this is my country. I grew up, maybe grew up rurally, and it's like, you're not taking my guns. It's like, well, consider that there's also people who grew up in that culture, and don't be so arrogant to say, if I was in their shoes, whatever. No, you don't know that.
Sure.
And I think it's just...
If I was in their shoes.
Yeah, like if you grew up in the city block where there were shootings every night, and
I gotcha.
You couldn't go to sleep, whatever. There's no bravado for that. You're not going to go out and solve it in one way or another.
True. I hear where you're coming from.
There's not a source you can pinpoint and go...
Sure.
Go down to the local saloon and do a shootout, whatever. It's like, no, it's not like that. The enemy's on every side and not something you can easily identify and just go take out. Because I think there's some of that bravado that comes with, can come from the gun culture, right? Like, well, because I have my guns, that wouldn't happen, that kind of thing. It's like, no, that's not accurate.
No, I hear you. And I like where you're coming from. In that context, and my perspective, this is, I believe certain areas, I'll go certain states, possibly, here's my experience. Okay, this is what I'll share. I was able to carry in New York State, where I came from. But the places that I was legally able to carry were far more limited. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So basically, I could carry at my own house. You follow me?
Yeah.
And I think about that, and that comes back to, okay, at that point, it's primarily up to law enforcement to protect me in a setting, a public setting, I'll call it. You follow me? From my perspective, I believe, when people have the ability to protect themselves in a public environment, like we can in North Carolina. North Carolina has different gun laws that allow individuals to carry in more public places. You follow me?
Yep.
And from my perspective, that makes... Now, I can't go back and look at statistics and compare. Ideally, but from my perspective, my philosophy is that makes North Carolina safer in the ability to protect individuals in more public places. You follow me? Mm-hmm. And that's how I see it. And that's because, and when I'm looking at New York and that limited, and especially the city that, you weren't allowed to, I look at that and I say, okay, yeah, but that's where legislation isn't going to change it. Because, and I don't want to make it about talking points, but, it's like if a person wants to do illegal things, they will find guns to hurt people regardless of legislation.
Yeah, so...
Does that make sense?
It does
I don't
make
want to
sense.
just be a talking point. That's my...
But that's what this conversation is.
Yeah, but I do dislike, talking points, and and that's my...
To me, there's a few things that I would like to see.
For it, yeah. What is it?
The first is a pretty stringent process to get one.
Sure.
So, like driving, for instance, right? You have to go through driver's education.
Yep.
And then you have to do some behind-the-wheel training with someone who's been doing this for years and years and years and knows all the pitfalls of what can happen as a new driver.
Sure.
And they drive alongside you. They say, now this is a thing that can happen. You want to be watchful for this. They can grab the steering wheel sometimes, right? Mm-hmm. They have their own brake pedal.
Sure.
Yep. That's the process. And then, even in different states, they have different laws for once you get your license. Like you can drive until nighttime, or you only can drive X amount of hours at night. There's different... because they recognize this age group, as you're beginning to learn, is one of the most common age groups to get in car accidents. Sure. So they're like, let's do some common sense driving laws, right?
Yeah.
Let's make it a little bit safer, as safe as we can. So the process is, it's not flawless. It doesn't account for sin, but I'd say it's doing a decent job in terms of, I feel good about the process Mia has to go through to get her driver's license. I feel good about it as a parent. And then once she gets her license, that's an important part of a lot of life, right? Like to be able to have a license, be able to drive your car, that kind of thing. And she has to renew it on a consistent basis, right? And if you drive around without your license, you're in pretty big trouble, right? Those are things to me that I want to see with guns. I want to see that it requires a training period from people who, you can argue, drivers training, they're good trainers or not. But the point is there should be some regulated training. This is how I see it. This is what I would like to see. Some regulated training that's consistent across, many states, right? I would also like to see behind the wheel. I'd like to see you have to spend time with a qualified individual, maybe even pay for that right, that opportunity.
Sure.
Where you go out to a shooting range, he has a break, whatever that looks like. I don't know, but where you have that hand-to-hand training.
Sure.
And then I would like to see a probationary period where, you have to, for 15 months, you have a permit, right?
Sure.
And, probably fine within a year you get your license, but it's just a probationary type thing where if you get in an accident or that kind of thing, maybe you don't get your license for this thing. And then once you get your license, you have to renew it, and you have to, and if you don't have a license, you're in pretty big trouble.
Sure.
So these are things I would like to see. If we do it with cars, I'd like to see us do it with guns.
Let me ask you.
Yeah, go ahead.
Does that currently exist?
I have no idea. I think... Here's what I think.
Yeah.
I think parts of it exist in certain states.
Sure. Yep.
Going back to your New York thing, I don't know this. I don't know what kind of penalties are supposed to happen as a result of having a gun that you don't have registered.
Sure.
I'd like them to be very, very, very strong so that if you choose to go the illegal route, you are so scared that you're going to get caught. That's what I would like to see. But again, I don't know what the actual penalties are.
Sure.
That's not an area I've investigated in. I honestly don't know. Maybe they are already.
That's okay. Yeah. And that's the reason I ask, because I do believe, people have... It's part of what you're saying in an education perspective. And now I'm going to share here again from my experience. I grew up, in order to receive a hunting license, I had to take a formal class. I'm sure it was very similar in Michigan. You could do this. Minnesota, excuse me. Michigan too.
Yeah, probably Michigan as well, yeah.
But
while we're talking about states, maybe Idaho
at
too.
12, I was able to attend a hunter's safety class.
Yeah.
I was not allowed to hunt without that license. So I had to take a class. I had to, it was a number of nights. And it was the neat part from my perspective. It was taught by our local game warden, who I knew, and respected, just like a police officer. Yeah. It's like, okay, I don't want to be on this guy's bad list. So I'm going to follow the rules so that he doesn't have to show up at my house. And then there is what they call a junior license. So you were a junior hunter from age 12 to 18. So when you became an adult, you could get a adult license, which meant you could hunt by yourself. Otherwise, if you had a junior license, you weren't allowed to hunt by yourself. You follow me?
Yeah, this is sounding very familiar.
And that was hunter's education.
Yeah.
For me growing up.
No, that's a good proxy. Like you can't hunt by yourself.
Yeah. And I'm going to speak to the, and specifically on handguns. Yes, state by state, it varies. In North Carolina, and here again is just my experience, I was able to take a small group of people with me to a carrying class, where that individual, you get the law, you understand where you cannot carry, and there's a process called castle doctrine, how you are able to protect your domain. It kind of, from my perspective, it stems from the Magna Carta, that there were rules to be able to protect your domicile, that, and that varies state by state. Well, state by state and region by region to a certain degree. You have to know, your specific area. But that being said, those individuals did have to pay for a class in order to receive a permit to carry. Now, granted, certain states are open carry, certain states are concealed carry. In order to get a concealed carry permit, you have to attend that class where there is a hands-on opportunity to shoot a weapon in front of a trained individual who has that license to be able to teach that class. You follow me? And that's in North Carolina. And other states have reciprocity, the ability to accept permits from other states. But yeah, so and that's where I'm at. Some of that legislation, I don't know, protocol is in place.
Yeah, that's amazing. I honestly wouldn't know.
That's where
that's good.
And that's where I come.
I bet I'm not the only one.
Exactly. Right? And that's where I'm at. The fear part. Don't take this. I'm not cavalier. I don't even want to come across as cavalier, because there's a sensitivity towards, people being hurt. And yet I'm also recognizing that at times this fear can be as hurtful.
Yeah.
And in some ways. And it basically, I'm looking in here. It's part of what you and I desire to do. We have these conversations because we're looking at it from 1,000 feet. And sometimes we need to talk with somebody who's been there or, had this experience in order to change our 1,000-foot perspective. Right. And so,
and the talking points only make that worse, right? They only
from my perspective, yes.
My 1,000-foot perspective feel like it's 2 feet away.
Yes.
When in reality, it's still 998 feet away.
Yes.
Right? Like, they might have given you a small piece of information that adds to the subject, but it certainly doesn't get you to the point where you understand it fully.
Yes.
But they it's
and
tough.
And it's I'm not trying to get off the subject either, but I think, when we're able to go beyond the talking points, because it's interesting we're talking about mental health. I have to renew my mental health license every year. I have to get so much education to maintain that license as well. You follow me? As a therapist.
Not to keep your mental health.
Yeah, maybe it's counter too. I don't know. But no, seriously, I have to do that. And it was interesting because we had at one, you're in a room and there was a individual who was talking about inner city dynamics, from a race relations perspective. And I just happened to be sitting next to a black fellow that I knew of. I didn't know him personally, but in that forum, I can remember, asking him, it's like, okay, I grew up with just like I shared with, my game warden and, and I had, the first handgun I shot was a police officer's handgun. Who, came...
You stole it from him?
No. This is a story, and some truth is stranger than fiction, because he had his, 357 Magnum. He came to our, 22 shooting club. We had 4-H, you were able to shoot 22s at targets. Okay. He showed up there and, he had his gun and he shot it and he says, anybody else want to shoot it? That kind of thing. And I said, sure, I'd love to. And I didn't have any real hearing protection to speak of. So he gave me 2 rounds to stick in my ears as hearing protection. Okay. I'm just thinking about how that would...
equivalent of the mom's arm as a seatbelt.
Yes.
Swinging out. And,
Yes. To where, this was a police officer, he knew that, right. Unless that round came into contact with the primer, it's not going to go off all by itself. And even
stick these bullets in your head.
Yeah, stick them in your ears. It'll protect your ears. And it even brings me back to your cars and seatbelts. As long as I've been alive, every gun has a safety on it.
Yeah.
And handguns are being made more and more safe because there's 3 different safety mechanisms that have to be engaged to be able to discharge a handgun. But I can remember sitting next to this guy. Sorry, long story short, but...
It's a good one, though.
It's sitting next to this guy.
With the bullets in your ears.
Exactly.
Okay.
And I asked him, I said, help me understand. Because we were talking about hoods and, and kids having their hoods up and, and I asked him, I said, based on my perspective, help me understand why a black teenager will tend to run from a police officer. You follow me? And I asked him that question. And
so this is 15-year-old Mark?
No. I'm sorry. I digressed on the pistol story. I'm back to the mental health license story where I'm sitting next to because I'm talking about
you don't have bullets in your ear at this point.
Right. Because I'm talking about my experience growing up. I had a close relationship with the police officers around me.
Gotcha.
Okay. So one time, there's too many stories, but I'm not. Yeah, I'm staying to the mental health one.
Mental health.
I'm at the training
with the guy
licensure.
Next to you, asked him. Black guy, you said.
Yep, happens to be a black guy. I asked him, help me understand what makes a black teen run from a police officer.
So the hoods, talking about the hoods, that was in that training event.
Yes, in that training
Again,
event.
I was still on the shooting range.
It's okay. There's, like you say, there's a lot more stories, but it would be completely off our subject for the moment. So I'm just really trying to work on this. Okay,
you're doing great.
Well, no, I realize I made it a little confusing.
That's right.
And
That's
I'll
where
take
I
responsibility. Yeah, that's right. You're the interviewer in this one. Come on, Justin.
I'm failing.
No, you're doing great.
I think you broke the line a long time ago.
I asked him why, help me understand that as a black individual and caring about, teenagers. And I can remember his response to me was, help me understand why the white police officer feels it's so important to chase that teenager. You follow me? And in that moment, I felt a little bit defeated because I wasn't trying to pin anyone down. And yet, from my perspective, I can understand, a police officer has a duty to protect. And is there a point where, I don't have to chase? Probably. And I would err on the side that, police officers exercise whether to enter into that chase or not all the time. And yet they have a sworn duty to protect, uphold and protect. And so I just recognized based on body language that that's where that discussion was going to stop in that moment. And I'm looking at it, I'm feeling defeated. I'm recognizing a sense of defensiveness on that individual. And we're two mental health professionals, which made that very sad to me. And
but wow, what a great response on his part.
Yeah, I wasn't at all upset at him for that response. And yet it wasn't, maybe it's the fact that it wasn't a direct answer I was looking for, a question with a question, but I can respect at that point, that's where our differences came together. You follow me? My cultural background was so different that it's like, if that police officer and, having neighbors who were police officers.
Your culture, this goes right back to the beginning of the discussion, which is your culture with guns. Also applies to your culture with law enforcement.
Yep.
Like you said, your game warden was who taught you how to shoot a gun, and police officer gave you bullets to shove in your ear when he let you shoot his gun.
And rides to school when I missed the bus.
Oh, yeah. So, your perspective, this gets into another polarizing topic of racism, which, will be hard to have without someone who's of a different race in the room. But
sure.
But it's, there is such a different perspective. It's like the guy who grew up on the city, corner and hearing shootings at night, couldn't fall asleep. Maybe a few bullets, stray bullets landed in their house, that kind of thing. It's that polarizing of a viewpoint, maybe worse, right? Like to grow up in the inner city as a black child versus growing up in the rural country as a white child.
Yeah.
And I would love for there have to been a lot more room for that conversation between you and he, because I feel like that would have been incredible.
Yeah.
But I think likely in whatever scenario you weren't in, it wasn't going to be, there wasn't room for that really.
Yeah. In that moment. And like you say, that's not to say that I haven't had other race-related discussions, since then. And I think, even in that topic, there's a tremendous amount of polarity, that whole aspect of, white privilege, that kind of thing. I think, even within the black community, there's a tremendous diversity on that perspective. And it's interesting. That police officer that allowed me to shoot his weapon was also a black individual. And I can still picture his kids riding on the bus with me, that kind of thing, to where, I would even dare say those black individuals in my community would have a very different cultural perspective than inner city, or, you know, or white inner city, that kind of thing.
Hey, thank you for listening to our podcast. If you like How I See It, please do all the things that podcasts tell you to do. Subscribe, rate, review, follow us, and or talk nicely about us on social media. If you want to reach out, the email is us@howiseeit.click. Yep, I said .click, as in .click. Please tell your friends about this show, and we'll see you on the next one.